All right, so do you remember your ABCs? Your always be closing, right? Everybody talks about closing rate for law firms. Specifically, I'm talking about family law firms. And the thing that kills me when I see these posts in these Facebook groups is people will rattle off a closing rate, but they don't give all the details that matter. So let me break down a few of the ways that people talk about closing rate and why you should stop listening to what people say online unless they break it down like this. All right, so here is what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss your sales funnel. And so in your sales funnel, you have leads, you have appointments that book, you have shows, and then you have closes. Right? This is a typical sales funnel. Now, in this example, this will amount to a total number. This is your total closing rate. I like to call it your raw closing rate. So everything that comes in, what comes out. That number is extremely different than this number here. So this number here is how many people did you talk to and how many people did you close, right? So the KPIs for these numbers for family law specifically, when it comes to Google ads, see how specific that is, right? I have to really define this stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to tell a phishing story and I might not mean to. When you run Google ads, the KPI here is between 20 to 30%. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? It could be a good salesperson, it could be the dollar amount, it could be the pitch itself, it could be your follow-up, it could be a lot of things, right? But 20 to 30% is a great closing rate on pay-per-click leads. So local service ads, traditional Google ads, or actual just cold organic traffic, right? This means that people that don't know you, like you, trust you, are coming into your ecosystem and you're closing them at that rate, right? Now, when this whole funnel takes place, and I have a lot of videos talking about these KPIs, usually this is 70%, right? 70% of leads book an appointment, 70% of those people show up, and then 20 to 30% of these people close. I'm gonna assume the 20 number here. This is gonna amount to roughly a 10% closing rate. So that number is very different than those numbers, right? Double or triple. And 10% doesn't sound very exciting. That means you got 9 no's for 1 yes. But this number will generally yield a 10x return on your ad spend. So it's extremely profitable. So why do we hear all the time that people close at 80% or 90%? The better question too is if they actually close that high, why aren't they billionaires, right? So 90%, this always sticks out to me because I hear this quite a bit, right? 90%, the reason that people say this all the time is that in this marketing funnel, right, we have our stages, I'm gonna put leads, appointments, shows, and closes. This is what happens in the marketing funnel. We don't know what type of leads are coming into their funnel, right? They haven't specified this on the Facebook post because most people either don't track it or they don't think to explain it this way. And so if all of these leads are referrals and we're running a smaller law firm, let's say $1 million or under, what happens is all of those referrals will likely book an appointment, they're likely gonna show up, and a huge percentage of them are gonna close. And so this is maybe how you get this 90% number, right? Maybe. Now, another scenario that tends to happen is not all of the leads are being tracked, not all of the appointments are being tracked, but what is being tracked are all the people they talk to that are qualified, because everyone likes to count those people, and then they close the qualified leads, and now they close at 90%. This is the more likely scenario, honestly, because most people don't track all their leads accurately. And so that is why we hear these crazy numbers of, yeah, I'm closing at 90%, I'm closing at 80%, versus the 10% that I am giving you right now, or the 20 to 30% for the appointment, right? So we have to define at what stage are we defining our closing rate. Is it from appointments to closes, or is it from total leads to total closes? Those are really, really important to understand what is closing rate. So what types of things affect closing rate, right? We've just talked about what is closing rate and how we define it. So generally when I talk about closing rate, I like to talk in terms of just the total number because it's easier to understand. So we're just going to talk about the 10% here. So if we were diagnosing a sales process, we're just going to talk about this, and that doesn't give us a lot of insight as to what's going wrong, right? So if a law firm comes to me and tells me that we have a sales problem and they say we're closing at 3%, if that's all the information I have, I can't recommend anything to them. I have to do some tracking. I have to do some number plotting. And so this process can take about 2 to 3 weeks to actually get the data in and then start making the fixes. But what I would do if this number was actually 3% is I would start tracking these numbers. I would track my leads, right? Start there. Then I would track my appointments. Then I would track my books, or my shows, sorry. Show rate. And then I would track my closes. And what I'm going to find here is a problem somewhere. I'm either going to have a sales problem, an actual sales problem, where my salesperson is not doing a good enough job closing, or they're not doing a good enough job following up, or I'm going to have a show rate problem. People aren't showing up, so I don't have enough people to actually sell. Or I will have a book rate problem. People are not booking on my calendar, so there's no way they can show up and there's no way I can close them because I never had the chance to talk to them. So one of these things is going to be wrong. And once I understand what that thing is, that's when I can go fix it. So I can start working on my scripts, or I can start working on my reminders, or I can start working on my intake. And this is the process we go through to fix a bad closing rate. So these are the things that affect closing rate. Now within each of these buckets, there are things that we can do to improve them, but these are the high level categories that all contribute to an actual closing rate if we define it this way. So let me know if you have any questions about that. If you do, more than happy to talk through this. You can come to our client only training. We do it every day. You can sit on that and have some ideas of what this stuff looks like.